Today at T-Mobile, I'm joined by a special co-anchor.
What up, everybody? It's your boy, Big Snoop Deal Double G.
Snoop, where can people go to find great deals?
Head to T-Mobile.com and get 4 iPhone 16s with Apple Intelligence on us, plus 4 lines for $25.
That's quite a deal, Snoop. And when you switch to T-Mobile, you can save versus the other big guys' comparable plans plus streaming.
Respect. We up out of here.
See how you can save on wireless and streaming versus the other big guys at T-Mobile.com/switch. Apple Intelligence requires iOS 18.1 or later.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? Well, with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills. Wait, did I say job title yet? Get started today and see how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does without me lifting a finger, so I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
Hello, and happy summer. As you eagerly await the next season of Wrong Station, we thought we'd tease you with a little bit more of our Patreon content. This time from our series, Grimoire Club, the show where we discuss the stories, authors, and media that inspire us. This is the first episode, hosted by Jacob, as we discuss Richard Matheson's Duel. If you enjoy what you hear, there are actually 8 more of these up on the Patreon right now at the $10 tier, with 1 more being added every single month. And along with that, you get From the Control Tower, our behind-the-scenes series where we discuss every new episode of The Wrong Station, some original D&D modules, and access to The Wrong Station ad-free. Though, however, you support The Wrong Station, from being a patron to simply subscribing, sharing, and leaving a review, thank you, and enjoy.
Welcome, listeners, welcome, patrons, to the inaugural episode of The Wrong Station Grimoire Club, where we're going to talk about the stories that we love most, the ones that have inspired us as horror and weird fiction writers. My name is Jacob Duarte Spiel.
I'm Alexander Saxton.
And I'm Anthony Botello. Welcome to the Grimoire Club.
Welcome to Grimoire Club.
Oh, I love that. I love that we said we weren't going to talk over each other, and we've immediately started to talk over each other. Anyway, our plan for this show is to rotate the hosting duties. So it'll be me this month.
Rotate the hosting duties. I'm sorry, last time I'll talk over you.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you. Just let me get through this intro. Rotate the hosting duties. So I'm doing this month. Alexander will do the next month, I think, and then Anthony will do the month after that, and we'll just keep rotating it. The reason for this is because we each have our own influences and favorite stories and favorite pieces of, sometimes it won't even be, traditional stories. Maybe once or twice we'll do, video games or maybe tabletop RPGs or something like that. And but each of us has our own influences, and part of the fun is that we're going to force each other to engage with them. We're going to try our best to pick things that none of the other 2 hosts have ever read or engaged with. So I'm your host for this first Grimoire Club, where we're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite pieces of fiction, Duel by Richard Matheson.
Can we at this point cut in audio of the Yu-Gi-Oh? It's time to duel. Do we?
Yeah, I think
do we have the rights to use that?
Yeah, I actually I wrote the original Yu-Gi-Oh manga. So yeah,
sorry, I always forget that you wrote the original Yu-Gi-Oh manga.
Jacob, you died in a
can.
You died in a scuba diving accident.
Oh,
last year.
Is that how the?
Wait,
unfortunately, yes.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
No.
It's worse than that. He's a very beloved man. It's quite possible that he was he was a hobby deep sea diver and scuba diver, and the likely case is that he died trying to rescue some people.
Oh,
boy.
no.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, that's a good way to go. That's
Yeah.
noble. That's heroic.
Anyway, this is overshadowing my joke I was going to make, which is that I watched the movie. I loved Adam Driver, Ben Affleck. We've rained a little bit on that now. We're in a bit more of a dour
I'm
mood
sorry.
now. It's okay.
Yeah. R.I.P. guy who made Yu-Gi-Oh. Yeah, let's get back to Duel, the story.
So let's
by
talk
Richard
about
Matheson.
Duel.
All right, I'm gonna give you a little plot synopsis to everybody listening.
Please.
Obviously, we've got spoilers here. So first, I want to start off by mentioning Duel is actually was inspired by real events that happened to Richard Matheson, the author, while driving on the highway on the same day that as the Kennedy assassination. I just think knowing that adds some extra flavor.
That's really good.
Right? I think it explains some things. Like, I feel like people behave extra weird and fucked up when something weird and fucked up has just happened in the world. But anyway, here's what happens.
Oh, that's interesting, because it's interesting that your mind goes to, there was like this sort of like psychic disturbance that like set people off. Whereas my mind goes to like the whole thing about like mid-century authors being sort of like cultivated by the CIA as like anti-communist propaganda for like the American way of life, and like the short story as an American art form being like bankrolled by the military industrial complex for purposes of international diplomacy. And the thought of someone trying to assassinate Richard Matheson on the same day as the CIA assassination of JFK.
Oh, that's funny.
It really feels like good 90s paranoia fodder.
It does. I will say, though, that Matheson is probably one of the writers least likely to have been included in that CIA funded group of people, because they went after literary authors mostly through like writers workshops and stuff. And Matheson was strictly genre and was writing like films for like Roger Corman and stuff. He wouldn't have been on their radar, in my opinion. And also, I don't know. We'll get into why I think he's like thematically interesting, which has a lot to do with what you're talking about. But first of all, here's what happens in Duel. So David Mann, he's a traveling salesman. He's driving across the United States, across, I believe, California, to follow up on some sales leads. He gets involved in a little back and forth with the driver of a gasoline tanker. Basically, David Mann just tries to pass him, and then the truck driver passes him back, and then David Mann is chagrined by this and passes the guy back. He's just trying to get where he's going quickly, basically, because he has to make this meeting for the sales leads. They go back and forth a few times. They're passing each other on this lonely stretch of highway, and then it becomes clear at a certain point that the truck driver's intentions they're no longer a game, and maybe they never were a game. He's trying to kill David Mann. He isn't playing, he wants him dead. And the story progresses along these lines, with the two of them, continuing to duke it out on this highway, and eventually David accidentally, kind of on purpose, kind of accidentally, tricks the truck driver into driving off a cliff. The truck explodes in a violent fireball. We never learn the driver's name, nor do we even see what he looks like besides his left arm, which he sticks out the window a few times. So I have my own thoughts, of course, but I'm really curious. Before I poison the well, what did you guys think of the story?
I mean, I enjoyed this story. It's a tour de force. It really makes you feel terrified. It really captures the powerlessness of being at high speeds on the highway when things break bad, and it also captures the powerlessness of being a man caught in the maelstrom of your own toxic masculinity bullshit.
I really liked it too. It made me very nervous while I was reading it the whole time. Definitely in the last 15-page stretch, I had the old restless leg going, and yeah, there's I felt very indignant. While reading it as well. There's a lot of asides Mann makes during the story, where he'll say things to the effect of "Jesus Christ, God damn it, you bastard." And I really felt the same way about this this truck driver who may or may not be named Keller. We don't really know. There's also this. There's this. I don't know if you want to get to this later, Jacob, but there's this great tense scene, sort of intermission in a diner.
Oh yeah.
Where he goes in just to splash water on his face, and he comes out and he sees the truck has pulled into the parking lot as well, and now he doesn't know which one of these people in the diner is the driver, and he's beating himself up for why the hell didn't I look at everyone's face before I went to the washroom?
Yeah,
and he orders a fucking ham sandwich. He's like, well, I'm here now. I guess I got to order a ham sandwich.
He also orders
a
beer.
Sandwich sucks.
He also
yeah,
orders
this is like
a
the
beer.
60s. Of
Yeah,
course,
he just
of
has a
course.
beer.
It's what he describes as a flat ham sandwich and a sour beer.
Yeah, he's living in Toronto in the 2020s.
Yeah,
he's getting a sour
beer. Not a sour beer, a fruity sour beer, but a Coors that tastes sour.
Yes. But yeah, I love the idea of like almost getting killed by a truck driver, knowing that he's in the room and being like, well, if I'm about to go back on my high-speed chase, I better have something to take the edge off.
Yeah, let me
I
at
better
least
have
have
a frosty one.
Let me have a frosty one and the worst sandwich I've ever eaten in my life. I just also want to say that I think this first episode of Grimoire Club, this very much is in line with the unofficial ethos or theme of our last season, which was the I can't remember, we called it the primal id or the what did we call it?
I thought it was just about
wretched masculine id.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Whereas we haven't discussed this yet, but I think this season I'm seeing obsession or maybe even fixation. Maybe
Teaser.
We haven't seen. Well, you guys haven't seen any of the full episodes yet, but just from the idea, from what we have lined up so far.
That's a good assessment. Okay, I think so. Those are very I think the kinds of smart and insightful comments that I would have expected from you guys. You stepped all over stuff I wanted to say later on, but this is great. And
we teed it up.
You teed it up. You're right. I think this is the brilliance of Matheson, though, and we'll talk more about this as we go along. But Matheson is really, really good at getting you to intimately relate to his main characters, and he does that by giving you this very distinct window into their brains. This is across most of his writing, including from his very first story to all the way to the end of his story of his writing career. He's always giving you this very intense window into their minds, and often starts off with situations that we've all experienced and thoughts we've all had. So, starting this off with, driving next to a truck, and then the truck passes you, or there's someone rude on the highway, and you get a little indignant, and then he takes that thought, that experience that's so common, and expands on it and makes it into something horrifying. But this appears throughout his writing, and it's one of the things that's so brilliant about it, in my opinion. But we'll get into that after. We'll keep talking about that. I want to give you guys an intro into who Matheson is, and why I wanted to pick him. Yeah. So, in order to truly appreciate the influence of Matheson on horror and sci-fi and modern culture as a whole, I know many of our listeners are likely familiar with his work, but maybe not the full scope of that influence. So, just a short list of his credits. It's kind of impossible to do one, but I'm going to try. So, one of the things with Matheson is he just kind of did every kind of writing that you could do at the time. He wrote movies, he wrote TV. I believe he even wrote a few audio dramas, for radio, novels. He wrote short stories. He wrote in genres. He did horror, fantasy, sci-fi, western, mystery. He did everything that was really considered genre at the time. He wrote on the first season of Star Trek. Fun fact: the episode that he wrote it's the one where it's The Enemy Within. So season 1, episode 5, where Kirk gets split into two guys, which also features the very first occurrence of the Vulcan nerve pinch, which has persisted to this day. It came up because in Matheson's original script, Spock was supposed to knock Kirk out, and Nimoy was like, I don't want to knock him out. Like, I think that's like too violent. I want him to do like a Vulcan nerve pinch. And that little bit of improv has now persisted into like it's like one of the more recognizable things from Star Trek. So that's kind of cool. He wrote the third most episodes of the original Twilight Zone, including Nightmare at 30,000 Feet. He wrote dozens of films, many for Roger Corman, including many of the like his most famous sort of cycle, which was the his adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe stories.
Wait, you're telling me Matheson wrote the Roger Corman Fantastic Four?
Oh my God, I actually didn't check that, but maybe.
Well, actually, I was gonna say I hope he didn't, but maybe I hope he did.
Yeah, make it more interesting. He wrote 28 novels. He wrote 90 short stories. He didn't just write his own adaptations of his own work. He wrote adaptations of other people's work. I'm going to do a little quiz with you guys now. So Matheson was called the author who influenced me most as a writer by, who do you think it was?
I'm going to say Stephen King.
I have no godly idea.
It actually is Stephen King. That is right.
Hey, nicely done, baby.
Nicely done.
Well,
this guy took the obvious answer and left me with a fucking bag of
You could have said the same. You could have said Stephen King.
That's not how I work. You know, for the restaurant, I can't order the same thing as you. That's just who I am.
I go to a restaurant, I order a terrible ham sandwich. You have to order a sour Coors because that's the only thing left on the menu.
Exactly. There's only two things.
Well, that was really clear to me because reading this story, it felt so familiar. And I don't think I've ever actually sat down and read something by Matheson, at least not without knowing it. Like, I think I've probably read him picking up an anthology of sci-fi short stories from like the secondhand bookstore as a teenager. But I don't think I've ever deliberately read Matheson, but the story felt so familiar to me. And I think there's just so much about I don't know, just the feel, the voice, the way action happens that has just seeped out into culture. And, I feel like he and Stephen King are similar kinds of writers, both in terms of the prolificness and in terms of the way in which they have just been, a baseline for a whole generation of pop culture in genre. So yeah, that felt like, I had a moment of like, oh God, who is it? Like Neil Gaiman or someone? No, that doesn't feel quite right. There's also the blue collarness of Stephen King. I think really rhymes with just the sort of everydayness of this story in a way that a lot of genre authors from the last couple decades that I can think of aren't grounded in the same. Like Neil Gaiman, who I think would be the other person who is that influential in pop culture he's a little more up in the clouds. Like he's not as, you don't get the sense from his work that he ever spent a lot of time shoving dirty, bloody and maggot filled hospital sheets into washing machines. And you get the sense from this story that, that Matheson, there's some dirt under the fingernails of this story and under the fingernails of Stephen King stories in a way that I don't think there is with someone like Neil Gaiman.
I think that's true. Matheson, King mentions that Matheson is sort of the writer who taught him that horror doesn't have to happen in Gothic castles 300 years ago. Horror doesn't have to happen at 200 years in the future on a dead spaceship. Horror can happen right here, right now, and it can happen anywhere. And it can happen in your, Midwestern town. It can happen on the streets of Los Angeles. It can happen anywhere. And that's sort of that is why that is why I think Stephen King says that Matheson is the most influential writer for him. And I think it comes through both in those terms, but also in terms of like how he writes and the perspectives that he jumps to and chooses. Okay, next part of the quiz. So there's a show, big cult hit called Kolchak the Night Stalker, initially adapted for TV in the 1970s by Richard Matheson, who would it would later become a cult hit. It was like kind of unsuccessful on TV at the time it came out. It became a cult hit, and it became one of the biggest influences on what show?
Kolchak the Night Stalker. Huh?
Kolchak the Night Stalker.
Buffy? No.
Maybe, actually, but that's not the one I'm thinking of.
Oh, the X-Files?
Oh my God, Alexander. Coming in.
2 for 2, baby!
Fuck!
Woo!
That's impressive.
Fuck! Ah!
So
Reading shit, Tony.
So far, Matheson is, in his way, responsible for / influencing two of the most important cultural touchstones for horror and sci-fi and fantasy, just of the modern era. We got one more good one, and then we're gonna talk a little bit more about Duel. So the last Man on Earth, which was his own, it was Matheson's screen adaptation of his own novel, I Am Legend. It featured these shambling vampire creatures, which would later become the inspiration for what movie?
Oh, Dawn of the Dead. Or Night
So
of the
close.
Living Dead?
Night of the Living Dead. That's right.
Yeah.
George A. Romero's zombies were based off of Matheson's adaptation of of I Am Legend. So now Matheson is also responsible for just zombies, just like the basics of zombies. All the things that we think of that are zombie-like are based off of, this adaptation of a Matheson novel. And finally, we're going to talk about Duel. It was written by Matheson. He adapted it into a TV film, and that would be the first ever film directed by, you can say this one, Alexander.
Well, it's Steven Spielberg.
That's right, baby.
I think it's, it's interesting talking about the influence. The other show I was going to say when you were talking about, when you were teeing up the X-Files question, was Stranger Things, which is very influenced by obviously things like the X-Files, but also by the films of Steven Spielberg.
Oh yeah.
And so I think it's interesting that the story we're talking about today was adapted by Spielberg and has, it feels like a Spielberg movie and like a Matheson story. And then, this really, really prominent pop culture force today is sort of also descended by different routes from these same two creators, which I think is really fascinating.
I still haven't watched season 4 of that. Mainly because I don't want to.
Have to.
Yeah, mainly because I don't want to watch 8 movies in a row.
Yeah.
It's indulgent. It's Duffer Brothers, you indulge yourselves. That's what I think. Here's my fucking hot take. Here's my hot take for the episode, among others.
It's indulgent.
It never hit for me, that show, being honest. I don't know.
There's a lot to love about it. I can see why it's very successful, but it is indulgent. It's very indulgent. It's there's a lot of cheap stuff. I think especially in the last 2 seasons, it's turned into like really, really obvious pastiche more than any actual sort of story or original thought. It really feels like a lot of like, here's a thing you recognize that we've repackaged to put the Stranger Things branding on it and get it out the door.
Which I don't think Matheson would approve of. Just to bring us back around.
I'm reminded, although I did want to say one thing, I'm reminded of Paul F. Tompkins has a joke where he talks about how there was a show that shot in the same building that he was shooting his show, and that show was called Remember and they would do like Remember the 80s, Remember the 90s, and Remember the 80s was a show, as he puts it, where the host would hold up a Rubik's Cube and say, "Remember that?" and then put it back down. And that's how that's how certain parts of Stranger Things feel to me.
Yeah. You remember
this?
Kate Bush?
Here it is. And then it put it back down.
Sorry, I just have one more tangent, which is that Vice TV, I don't even know if these people watch these fucking things, but they produce these series of docudramas called The Dark Side of Blank. The Dark Side of the 80s, the Dark Side of the 90s, Dark Side of the Ring, which is about wrestling, Dark Side. Now they're doing Dark Side of comedy, and of course, you know, being a lowly screlting non-union actor, I've done several of these, and most recently was for an episode of Dark Side of Comedy about Norm Macdonald, and I was just thinking, this feels fresh. This feels a little bit,
a little soon,
a little soon, folks.
So
just wanted to,
be on the lookout.
Say.
Be on the lookout for Anthony Botello as Norm Macdonald.
Anthony Botello as the guy who fires Norm Macdonald from SNL in The Dark Side of Comedy.
Oh, God.
Norm Macdonald. With a guy whose face they try really not to show you because he does not look like Norm Macdonald.
So Matheson is intractably linked to all these major horror movements of the 20th century, basically every major horror movement of the 20th century. And in many ways, because these horror movements became mass media movements, he's also linked up to these mass media movements as well. You know, zombies, Spielberg, Stephen King, X-Files, and all the art that those people have inspired. They owe something to Matheson, which is part of the reason why I chose Duel for this first episode. He's a giant in the horror and mass media world, but to many people, he's an invisible giant. He's not somebody that they know is there, but his influence is obvious once you know what you're looking for. What do you guys? So there's a lot to talk about here. What do you guys want to talk about? Like, I have my own stuff. You know, I want to talk about, you know, how it's inspired me, but was there anything that's jumped out at you when you were reading this?
I mean, the thing that really, really stood out to me when I was reading it, in the context of reading it for this show, was how much like a Jacob story it felt like to me. You know, I was reading this and I could really, really see classic car. I could really see the tower. I could really see bits of Run 'Em Down. I could just see from reading this how, like, I've heard you talking about Matheson as an influence since we were like 17, and I can really see how he's gotten under your skin, and how the stories that you're writing feel like Matheson stories. They have the same sort of energy, the same rhythm, the same sort of interiority.
The same pissed off protagonist.
Yeah, the same fiery Mediterranean blood.
I think with Matheson, what I jive with, like Duel was specifically the inspiration of the first story I ever wrote, which is The Attendant, way back in season 3. Yeah, which is yeah, and it's because I think, you know, but he's also the inspiration for something I'm writing right now, like this story specifically. And these are very different stories, though. They have very different themes, characters, plots. To me, that's the beauty of Duel and many of Matheson's stories. He creates these like vessels, these capsules that can contain so many different kinds of themes and concepts. And you know, because at the core, what you're doing from a plot perspective is very simple. Someone is trying to kill me. I don't know why. And worst of all, I can't get away. That's Duel. But that concept can be stretched out into and modified in a million different ways to talk about so many different things. Because the POV is confined to the main character's world. You get a window into their mind. So it's like, you get the paranoia, sure, but it's also about what do they think is going on and why. And why do they think this thing is happening? Is it because they're being punished? Is it because this other person is crazy? It creates this like very high tension character study, essentially, where all the thoughts and actions are these, you know, it's everything is life and death, but it's also revealing character. And he's really great specifically at, you know, taking this one sentence idea, this one sentence plot, and combining that with a character, like finding a way of matching character to plot so closely that the character kind of becomes the plot, or the character's experience becomes the plot. And that's what I take from a lot of Matheson's stories, whether it's this, whether it's The Incredible Shrinking Man, whether it's I Am Legend. All of these stories, they basically have one sentence at the core that drives the plot forward from start to finish.
I think it's such a useful storytelling tool too, because it's such a good way of controlling the information that you're giving to the reader. And it's such a good way of being able to pull sleight of hand tricks as a writer. I find that I tend to really gravitate toward more of a third person omniscient voice, and so I'm always surprised and delighted when I try and write a story more in this mode, where there's just all sorts of ways that I can hide things from the reader and then reveal them later, and it feels really meaningful and punchy, because it doesn't feel like I've concocted a way to hide this information, because with this really confined point of view of this one person, usually trapped in an airplane seat or a two-seater car or something, it just makes a lot of sense for them to have really limited information. And so that was another thing that I thought about when I was reading this story. I was like, oh yeah, here's something I really want to try and do deliberately more often, because there's a powerful utility here.
Yeah, I think you and I have had this conversation in the past, but something that I believe is true about most plots, most stories, maybe all stories, is that everything is at its core a mystery. Like everything that people write, everything that people read has an element of mystery to it, something that you don't understand, and that the story is sort of drawing you towards over the course of the however many pages it is. Whether that's and one of the big questions is, will you get the answers that you want, for example? And in Duel, one of the big mysteries is, who the hell is this guy that's trying to kill David Mann? And he never answers that question, but the mere fact that it is a mystery is due to exactly what you point out, which is that this is a very cramped point of view. It's third person, and the entire story, it doesn't even focus too much on external things like what man is seeing. It's almost entirely what man is feeling.
Yeah, I think a story like this is a good counterpoint to the idea that, the cheap piece of writing advice to show don't tell. This is a story that does a lot of telling, and I think it's really effective, and it's what makes the story work.
I mean, he does observe things throughout the story, but anything he sees is just to set it relative to his frame of mind, his mood. He'll see things, but he'll be distracted. He'll relate it back to a situation. Or
he'll have an opinion.
These vistas and hills, but not give a shit, or think, there's the slope. I can get ahead of the bastard there.
Exactly. Yeah, he starts out noticing the hills, and he just thinks they're pretty, and then towards the end, the hills have this life or death meaning, and it's all about the emotional state, and anything that he, like you said, anything he sees or hears is tinged with his emotional state.
Again, another thing this story does that you're not quote unquote supposed to do when you're writing a short story is it starts out with just sort of a description of the hills. And you're reading that and you think, oh, well, this is the sort of thing that they would tell you to trim out of a story in a traditional writer's workshop. But then, yeah, as you said, it's actually incredibly important and incredibly integral to the machinery of the story to do that. So I thought that was really interesting.
Also, just at the beginning, he sees there's something every now and then, but there's a part of the story where he's picking up speed, and they tell you just things he's seeing in a rapid fire succession, just to give you an idea of that speed while you're reading, because maybe you can visualize. It's just something to help you visualize and have that sense of trajectory and speed while you're reading, which is not necessarily the easiest thing to do either.
Yeah, that's true. That it's a story that is a real clinic in describing a journey and giving a sense of movement across space, which is something that I struggle with all the time. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because now I've got that sort of filed away in my mind as a trick I can do, a tool.
Yeah, I one of the things that makes me laugh while reading the story, though, is the descriptions of how fast he's going, which are written in miles per hour. And
he's
looked
going
them up
40 miles an hour.
Yeah, it's forgive me. I don't really drive. I don't drive at all. It doesn't seem that fast.
He's not going very fast. I looked it up. It's because it's 1963, but I've looked up all the different speeds that he mentions. And it's only towards the end where he's going faster than I go on the highway. And I'm just like, that's not that fast. If I go it
70 miles per hour, Christ, I'm not used to this.
My God.
Yeah, it starts out where he's going 50 and he's like, that's as fast as I like to go. And I looked it up. And it's like, that's 80 kilometers an hour. Dude, if you go 80 on any road outside of a city in Toronto, people will kill you.
If you go 80 on a road that says 60.
Yeah. If you go less than 80 in a school zone, someone will take a crowbar to your car. But like when he gets up to 90, that's when I'm like, okay, that's pretty fast. They want
it's like when you're reading The Great Gatsby and like the car accident happens, it's like, oh, he was driving so recklessly. He was doing 40 miles an hour, and that's like the fastest any human being had ever gone up until that point in history.
Yeah, his skull caved in from the sheer velocity. So something that you guys brought up, and I'd like to circle back to it, is talking about show don't tell and the sort of the things that Matheson does. Something that I love about Duel and Matheson in general, and we've sort of talked around this. He's just not the best writer or like the most beautiful writer.
Yeah.
I would say his prose is often clumsy. I think many of his characters are broadly drawn. Some of them border on caricature, especially female characters. And I see a lot of myself in that. I don't write as well as I want to. I don't often create perfectly drawn characters or scenes that blow me away or, paragraphs and sequences of astonishing beauty. But it doesn't matter. Like, Matheson is so good at, I think, the essential ingredients of what makes a compelling narrative that it doesn't fucking matter that he's not the best writer. It's almost like he does all of his work before he even sits down and starts writing the computer in terms of selecting what the story is going to be about and understanding the stakes and the game of the story. He's proof that you don't need that absurdly high level of technical skill to be a great writer, even a huge vocabulary. You can just thrive off of those great concepts, and then good enough, sometimes great. He absolutely has passages that are fantastic, sometimes great writing. And most importantly, I think the desire to connect with your audience on that personal level by writing about things that they can understand. I think talking about Matheson as a film writer is a really interesting topic, because I think reading his stories, what I get most out of his stories is like, man, a lot of his stories are just great screenplays, or great action lines in a great screenplay. And Matheson's version of Duel, what he wrote for the film, is different in very specific and identifiable ways from the story. And I think, we get into that's when you start noticing what Matheson really writes about thematically. In preparation for doing this episode, I went and I tried to find critical articles, like literary criticism about Matheson's stories, and there's so little. He's very under discussed as a writer, especially for someone who's as influential as he is. After he died, some academics put together a collection of essays about his writing and sort of digging deeper into the themes that Matheson tackles. And they noticed what I noticed in reading the majority of Matheson's work, which is that he is often writing about masculinity specifically. I wouldn't call him, he's not a feminist writer. And if you have read his stories and read how he writes women, you will probably be aware of this. But he is fascinated by what is a crisis of masculinity that has been ongoing since the end of World War II, where, women finally entered the workforce in droves. Men came back from the war, were confronted by women who had control over their own lives, power, and didn't want to give it up, nor should they have to. And Matheson, that is those are the circumstances under which Matheson begins to write. 1950 is his first story, and I think most of his stories address this sort of masculinity crisis, this idea of, coming back from a war where you saw a bunch of people die and you thought you were doing this for a very specific version of American masculinity, you thought you were protecting a certain vision of America by doing this, and you get back and since you've been gone, that vision of America has changed dramatically. So Matheson writes about that, and Duel, like you said, Alexander, at the beginning, Matheson is writing about, you know, men who are being damaged by their own masculinity and toxic masculinity. Although I would argue, and it's also like, it shouldn't go unremarked upon that the lead character's last name is Man. Like,
you know, it's not super subtle.
It doesn't, but who fucking cares?
Yeah.
I thank you, Matheson, for making it clear. That's my feeling.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting because the screenplay, which is Matheson coming back to his own story,
it's
a
like a
decade
year
later, 2 decades.
No, it's
later?
actually only a year later.
Oh, it's only
it's not that long, I don't think.
It's really clear that he's thought about what was underneath the hood of this story a lot more in that year. And the screenplay is a response to the short story, because in the short story, you know, it's about masculinity in the sense that it's about this sort of like, it's this contest between the two men, and it's about, you know, it's about like, you're back in the jungle, and it's about this sort of, you know, genteel ad man, you know, descending into a primal state sort of. Whereas in the film, I think it's much more consciously about a crisis of masculinity. It's explicitly about that. You know, the movie starts with this guy like listening to a radio show where someone talking about how he doesn't have any control at home, and he's laughing along. And then, you know, he's at the gas station, and you know, he's ordering the attendant around. The attendant's like, "You're the boss," and he's like, "Not in my home, I'm not." And like, there's this sort of deep sense that this guy is just profoundly threatened by the existence of women, the existence of any kind of female empowerment, and feels like he is uprooted from any sort of masculinity, which is why he's really drawn into this contest. And I guess there's sort of an implication that the truck driver is going through something similar. I think in the story version, there's a lot more of an emphasis on the class difference between Man and Keller. It's a lot more of a like rural urban thing. Whereas I think in the film version, it's just all about masculine id. It's all about like this deep insecurity at the heart of both these men. And I think like you can see that in, you know, there's the scene in the back half of the movie with the school bus, and about like helping these stuck children, and Man isn't able to do it, but the truck driver is. Yeah, and I think this is Matheson like coming close to grasping the. I mean, you've talked to me about how he wasn't a feminist, and it's really like he has all of the premises laid out for like a world that is kind of like the way we think about feminism and gender equality today, but he isn't quite able to make that leap. And I think that's really interesting. I think he gets a lot closer in the screenplay version than he does in the short story version. But I just think it's so interesting how these stories are in conversation with each other.
I think you're also forgetting one of the key moments as well early on, where he has a conversation with his wife, and his wife says that like she wished that he had done something when they were at a party the night before, and one of Matheson's like either a coworker or a client sexually harassed / sexually assaulted her at this party. And David Mann did nothing to prevent or to stand up for her. And his argument is like, well, what was I supposed to do? You know, he would have, you know, closed his account or something along those lines. Like, you know, it's like he's beholden in some way to this person. And I think, you know, I think that there's like a slight difference there. I maybe have a slight difference of opinion with you on some of this, where I think Matheson is fully aware of what he is like talking about and writing about when he talks about this crisis of masculinity. And while I don't think he's a feminist writer, I don't think that he views these attitudes or behaviors as helpful or useful in the slightest. And I think that like one of the things that's really cool about both the film and the story Man initially gets involved in this little contest with the truck driver, but at a certain point he becomes the reasonable one, and he says he wants to apologize. He wants to stop this from happening.
Buy the guy a beer.
Buy the guy a beer. Talk to him. Try and smooth things over. In the movie, he's a little more aggressive, but he doesn't want to kill the guy, nor does he want his life to end on this random stretch of highway. And I think that masculinity in a lot of Matheson stories is either something that is destroying the main character from the inside, or it's destroying them from the outside. I think back also on like Matheson's writing, he is often written about and seems to care deeply about just men doing better, and that a lot of the horror of his stories is men behaving poorly, and then also bigotry. Like I think he can be clumsy. I don't think he's the greatest writer in the world, but I think his intentions are always quite clear, and he himself has been quite clear about his intentions. He was anti-segregationist in the 50s and 60s. He had a personal philosophy that he stuck to. There were guys out there at the time like Robert Heinlein who were very clearly fascist pieces of shit, and Matheson wasn't one of those. He just wasn't one of those guys. He clearly was deeply concerned about the ways in which men were sort of harming themselves and harming the world around them. And also he was deeply concerned about war and bigotry. He fought in World War II. He saw what happens to people who go to war. And it's just I think there's like a deep humanitarianism in a lot of these stories. He has a lot of empathy for the people that appear, even if they are kind of assholes.
Well, I think that comes across really strongly in the film version. Like, I think one of the most interesting changes is the feeling at the end of the story in each one, because the short story ends with this really strong feeling of triumph from man, which is I think meant to be tragic. I think it's meant to be,
yes,
here's this guy who's succumbed. But I think the film version doesn't really give you that same satisfaction. Even if it's a false satisfaction, the film version just ends with this guy sitting on the edge of the cliff, throwing down rocks, looking just so depressed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he didn't want to kill. He didn't want to kill this guy.
Yeah.
I would actually say that's actually one of the few moments at the end of the story where he steps outside of man's brain, in the story version, where, because it's Matheson describing man's reaction to overcoming this great obstacle, and he explicitly says, I believe, it's not a moment of triumph. It's the moment of, being in the jungle and surviving the attack of a great beast, which is not a particularly comfortable feeling. Like, I think it's the sort of feeling of like, I don't know, in my mind, that's more of a stressful feeling because it feels like it could happen again. And I think he's very careful, like you said, in the movie to change that. So it's extremely clear that man is not happy at the end of this event. Man is not excited by the idea of murdering another human being. It's not a triumphant moment. It's a moment of survival and, like you said, exceedingly depressing moment.
I just heard a loud truck blow its horn outside my apartment window, and now I am freaked out.
Heard you talking about Duel in there.
Heard you talk about trucks in there.
Any final thoughts?
No, Jacob, I'm just so glad that I finally read it and I've finally seen the movie, and I'm so happy that we got the chance to have this talk about it, blowing well past the limits we set for ourselves, as we usually do. But I had a wonderful time.
Yeah,
I'm very
Thank
happy
you for
to
doing
hear
all the research and preparing all of this.
No problem.
Good story. I did not watch the film, so I didn't really contribute in there. But yeah, it's a good story.
I'm glad you
it's a good
guys
film.
liked it.
It's a very tight, like 94 minutes.
Yeah, I recommend it.
That's perfect movie length. Oh my god,
perfect length. It's the length 90% of movies should be.
It's also fun because you get to see that Spielberg was that good at directing basically from day one. Anyway, thank you so much to the both of you for reading the story and for having this conversation with me, and thank you to all of our patrons who are listening to this. I hope you found it enlightening.
Thank you for listening to Grimoire Club.
I'm loving that voice. I think that's
my new guy. This is Grimoire Club guy.
I don't know.
This is the ancient
Danny
librarian.
Grimoire Club.
Hello, my name is Danny Grimoire Club of the Oyster Bay Grimoire Clubs.
I was about to ask.
Who is that? Who is that? Wait a second.
Who is this?
Who is Danny Grimoire Club?
Find out next time on the second edition of the Grimoire Club. Thank you for listening.
I will be hosting, and so there will be a lot more of this.
God damn it.
Is that Daniel Day-Lewis?
I think it might be Daniel Day-Lewis.
Bye.